What a time to be alive, because sometimes history doesn't announce itself with sirens. It doesn't kick down the door. It doesn't come with fireworks. History walks into the room wearing a suit, sits down at a polished table, smiles for cameras, and then says one sentence that changes everything. And what are the odds that at Davos 2026, the world's most elite stage, where the biggest institutions on earth gather to debate the future, the BIS is sitting there, Ripple is sitting there, and the conversation quietly drifts into the exact thing that could rewire the entire global financial system? Not hype, not memes, not retail fantasies, but the actual blueprint here. Because once you hear what got said, once you hear what was named, once you see how the puzzle pieces connect, you'll realize this isn't just another crypto headline. This is one of those moments where the system accidentally admits what it's been building all along. And if you understand it, you'll understand why XRP could be approaching a point of no return. Let me paint a picture for you. Davos is not where ideas are born. Davos is where ideas are approved to the public. It's like Hollywood. Movies don't get created at the premiere. The premiere is simply the moment they decide you're allowed to see it, when they display it for everyone, the final product. And that's why this matters so much you guys really got to pay attention here, because when you hear institutions casually start talking about tokenization and stablecoins and new financial infrastructure on big stages, that's not new. That's not a trend. That's not something that is just some coincidence. That's the final phase of the rollout. It's like the internet in the early 90s. People, think the internet arrived when everyone had it in their homes. No, the internet was being developed, stress tested, mapped, controlled, long before the average person even knew what a browser was. By the time the public heard the word .com, the rails were already laid. And this is the exact same thing right here, because if you go back just 1 year, stablecoins were barely mentioned. Tokenization was seen as a concept. Now it's being framed like it's the new normal. When a concept becomes fashionable on a world stage, it's already institutional policy behind closed doors. That's what you're missing. And at Davos 2026 might be the moment the world accidentally said the quiet part out loud. Now, I want you to understand something. The BIS isn't just another organization. The BIS is not like a random regulatory body. The BIS is the central bank of central banks. This is the building where monetary architecture gets discussed. This is where standards form. This is where the rules of the game are written before you ever see the game on TV. So when the BIS shows up in a Davos panel and the conversation touches anything related to the future infrastructure, you're not watching a debate. You're watching a reveal. And it's the type of reveal that doesn't look dramatic. Unless you know what you're looking at, and you see everything beforehand like a magician. No, no, no. It's like watching someone casually hold the blueprint to a skyscraper. If you don't understand architecture, it looks like paper. But if you do, you realize you're looking at the future skyline. And that's exactly what it is right there, because the key topic is very clear. Tokenization, stablecoins, liquidity pools, interoperability, private and public collaboration, a unified financial internet. And sitting right in the middle of that conversation is the one company that has been building payment rails for a decade. What is that company? I'll let you guess. Ripple. And here's the part that people don't want to admit. Not all blockchain projects were built for the same mission. Some were built to prove a concept. Some were built to store value. Some were built to experiment. Some were built to power apps. But Ripple, on the other hand, Ripple was built to do one thing: move value like the internet moves information. That's it. And the reason XRP keeps coming back every cycle is because the mission never changed. They have the same goal in mind. The world changed, the demand changed, the timeline finally caught up, but the truth is global finance has a pain problem. Cross-border settlement is slow, collateral gets trapped, liquidity sits idle, fragmentation increases cost, and in 2026, those inefficiencies are no longer tolerable because tokenization demands speed, stablecoins demand interoperability, and institutions demand finality. So Ripple isn't at Davos just for vibes, just for fun, just to say they went there. No, Ripple is there because when the system upgrades, it needs pipes, it needs rails, it needs architecture that can actually scale. And that's why this moment feels so different, because Ripple isn't sitting here asking, oh, can we have permission? They're not asking for permission anymore. Ripple is being discussed like a piece of infrastructure. And when that happens, you're not early anymore. You're at the moment before activation. Let's go historical. Let's go to the 1800s. America didn't become an economic superpower because they were motivated. It became a superpower because of railroads. Railroads literally changed everything. Goods moved faster, trade exploded, cities expanded, industry scaled. But here's what most people don't know. The biggest wealth was not made when the railroad was popular. It was made when the railroads was, still being laid quietly and the public thought it was just another project. And then one day, the first major line connected. And from that moment, there was no going back. There was no point of return. Not the moment everyone celebrates, the moment the system locks into a new track. And I believe Davos 2026 is one of those moments because the BIS level conversations start naming real projects. And Ripple is sitting on the same exact stage. You're looking at the railroad map. Now, this is where things get serious. There's one phrase that keeps repeating in these institutional frameworks: public and private. That is the formula right there. Not crypto versus banks, not decentralization versus regulation. The real future isn't a war, it's a merger. That is the real future right there. It's a convergence. The old system becomes digitally native. This new system, becomes regulation ready, and they meet directly in the middle. That's why the phrase public-private collaboration matters so much, because when institutions say that, they're admitting is this: we can't build the new system alone. They need a private sector, and not just any private sector, not random startups. They need, regulated entities, enterprise infrastructure, compliant rails, cross-border connectivity, technology already proven at scale, and that's exactly where Ripple fits today. Ripple isn't just some random crypto company with a coin called XRP. No, Ripple has been moving toward being a financial infrastructure provider for years, and almost a decade now, over a decade. And if you want to understand why XRP matters, it comes down to one word: liquidity. People love talking about the price of XRP, but institutions don't talk about the price. They talk about liquidity, because liquidity is the oxygen of finance. Without it, the markets choke, settlement fails, collateral gets trapped, and every insufficiency becomes a tax, a liability. Now think about, tokenized assets, tokenized bonds, treasuries, tokenized real estate, tokenized commodities, and all that sounds so futuristic and so cool. But until you realize the real problem here, the real problem is if everything becomes tokenized, liquidity has to move instantly. And not just inside one system, across systems, across jurisdictions, across pools. When you hear discussions about connecting liquidity pools, interoperability, and financial, market infrastructures bridging zones, that is literally them describing the need for a bridge asset and bridge rails. They need something that can connect networks like routers connect the internet. And again, you see XRP, keeps showing up into the conversation because this is not about hype. This is about function. Let's talk about the internet again here. The internet was, only one because it had one superpower: interoperability. It didn't matter if you had an Apple computer or a Windows computer. It didn't matter what brand your router was. The protocols allowed connection. That's why the internet scaled. Now imagine global finance today. It's fragmented. Every, system is its own island, different rules, different rails, different standards, different, settlement systems. Tokenization makes that worse unless you have something called interoperability. And that's why these institutional frameworks, keep saying the same exact thing over and over again. They all sound like they are copying each other, because what they're saying is we must prevent fragmentation. Translation to that is basically, if we build this wrong, the future will just become a mess. So they're pushing for, unified systems, unified ledgers, unified messaging, specs. The financial internet is basically just being built right in front of our eyes right now. And this is the part where you should be paying attention. Ripple has been obsessed with interoperability since day one. That was literally the whole entire mission for Ripple and XRP. So when these global bodies start, discussing interoperability as a requirement, they are describing Ripple's wheelhouse right there. Now, I know some people hate this part and they hear regulation, they think it's a threat, but the truth is regulation is the green light for institutions. Institutions don't move until they have clarity. That's why, market structures matter. That's why compliant stablecoins matter. That's why they keep talking about a level playing field, because once the rules are clear, banks don't run away. They rush in. And I want you to really understand this. Once banks are fully allowed to operate inside digital assets, there is no, crypto industry separate from banking. It becomes one thing. And the digital assets industry as we know it today. And once that happens, liquidity floods the space. That's where, repricing happens all across the market, specifically for XRP. That's where the cheap accumulation window ends. And if you're watching this unfold at Davos, you're watching the pre launch marketing of a whole entire new system. Now, let's ask a question that nobody wants to ask. Why are certain faces missing from the stage? Why isn't the conversation framed like a Bitcoin conference? Why is it not dominated by founders? Why does it feel institutional? Because this isn't about ideology. This is about implementation right here. This isn't the early days anymore. This is the infrastructure era. And the infrastructure era isn't led by, anonymous legends. It's led by compliance, by, integration, by settlement bodies, clearinghouses, liquidity operators. And when Ripple is there while others aren't, that is a big signal to me. I mean, I would think it's a big signal for you as well. Not about who's better, but about who's being positioned as, something useful. Let me say something very clearly. The domino effect does not start when the last domino falls. It starts when the first domino tips, and the rest of the world usually does not notice the first domino.